it is really the wild, wild west in Texas when it comes to whiskey making.
And it should be nothing else, right?
Exactly. You've got every style of whiskey being made. You have bourbon and single malt and rye whiskey and wheat whiskey and corn whiskey and rice whiskey and some guys making some 12-grain whiskey. I mean, there's some crazy stuff being done in the state. But that's one of the reasons why Texas is such an exciting region for whiskey production.
When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into episode 33 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snelling's Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. Today, I am in high spirits to introduce our next guests, Robert and Marcia Likarish. Robert, in his last semester of law school, decided he was going to pursue distilling instead of practicing law. He and his brother Jonathon opened Ironroot Republic Distillery in Denison, Texas in 2014, and they quickly recruited the help of their mother, Marcia, also known as the Mother of Texas Whiskey. Now, for almost 10 years, they've operated a thriving family business and crafted award-winning whiskeys. Robert and Marcia, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Well, thanks for having us.
Oh, we're excited
like
to
that
be
intro.
Here. You're great.
All right. Did you like the pun, Robert?
I did.
Yeah.
Okay, we can thank Aaron, our marketing assistant, for that one.
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, so who wants to start?
Let Robert start,
Robert.
since he's the one that talked us into getting involved in all this
She
distilling.
just said I'm the crazy one.
Especially after getting a law degree and deciding, you know what, maybe law's not for me. So tell us about that. Tell us, did you always want to be a lawyer and then change your mind, or how did you end up in law school?
I ended up in law school because I was getting ready to graduate from college and was like, what do I want to do next? What's do I want to get a job right now? And my roommate was applying for law school and taking LSATs. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. Let's do that. And
Yes, LSATs, very fun.
Yes.
Very fun. So like me, you had zero interest in being a lawyer until it was kind of time to make a career choice. I was a psychology major and didn't know what I was going to do with that. So how about you?
I was a economics and Asian studies major.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Did you study Asian whiskeys?
I actually did a little bit as far as going over there and consuming quite a bit of them. So, but yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
He had a great professor that was from Taiwan. And so, Taiwan does have some great whiskeys over there. So it was not ill. It was a good study.
Yeah, it was a very good month over in Taiwan for sure on that one.
I bet. All right. So your mother is the mother of Texas whiskey. So I assume that you grew up in that environment, in and around whiskey, or no?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Neither of my parents drank whiskey or really liquor. I can't ever really recall them drinking liquor except for maybe a Bloody Mary every once in a while.
Okay.
They didn't even really drink beer or wine at home except for at Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, they would have wine at dinner.
Okay.
And then when we would go to the beach, my dad would drink really terrible tequila, Zima, those sorts of things. So,
Oh my gosh.
that was so there wasn't really a lot of alcohol. Now, after getting into this a little bit, we raided my parents' liquor cabinet because they had one that had bottles that hadn't been opened since the 70s. But I did discover that my family did enjoy crossing over to Mexico when they lived over in El Paso to get bottles back in the day. So there was a wilder side before I came around for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are in Texas, and so the majority of people around here, I would assume, drink margaritas too.
And Kahlua.
And Kahlua, yes. And Kahlua as well. All right. So zero whiskey background for you then. You're in law school. What on earth possesses you to go say, hey, I'm going to go start a distillery?
So it started a few years before that, actually. So after I graduated high school, my parents had an awakening when it came to alcohol. They started going to wine tastings and going out and doing things, and they got really into wine. And so when my brother and I would come back during breaks, that they started taking us to wine tastings. And they would go, and my mom would be wandering around tasting all the different wines. My dad would go talk to like one of the main guys who was an importer, and he would take my dad and me or my brother back into his back office, and he'd start pouring cognacs and Armagnac and all sorts of crazy like French brandies. And so while I was consuming whiskey in college, it was more of the likes of Kentucky Deluxe and
things that bounce if you drop them.
Exactly.
Crown.
Yeah, we did drink a little bit of Crown when we felt fancy. But yeah, my like higher end liquor experience was always just with brandies. And so we went to a family reunion in 2008 up in Spokane, Washington. And we went into this Thai restaurant in this little shopping center in that city. And we walked out of the Thai restaurant after lunch with everybody. And we noticed that just in the corner of this little shopping center was this little distillery that had just opened up called Dry Fly Distilling. And so we'd been to wineries, been to breweries before, but never been to a distillery. So we're like, yeah, let's go check it out. Well, we walked in, and it was a small distillery, but they had these beautiful copper stills when you walked in. And my family's always been in the copper industry. My parents are from Butte, Montana originally, which is the home of the Copper Kings, a ton of copper mining in that city. So we like to joke that we've got a lot of copper in our blood from all the heavy metal from them living in that city.
Right.
But there's just something beautiful and warm about copper. And so we sit there, we're looking at it, and my dad leans over to my brother and I and goes, this is pretty cool. When you guys retire, this is what you should do. Just hang out and do this when you retire. And we're like, yeah, that sounds like a fun idea. That'd be
so the
cool.
seed was planted by your dad.
Yes, it was. But he's been in the mining business for over 50 years. So he really liked the copper.
It sounds like it, yeah.
So fast forward, getting ready to graduate from law school. And I had a little bit of law school burnout, clerking at a couple law offices, and just realizing that I don't think that lifestyle was really for me. So I was like, what else can I do? I wanted to graduate, get my law degree, because otherwise my mom would kill me.
Right.
But I decided, all right, I'm going to go off. I'm going to do something else. And so at Christmas dinner 3L year, I announced the family, because that's the time of least resistance. Everyone's in pretty good spirits. Mom's not going to get in a fight with me at the Christmas dinner table.
Couple glasses of wine.
That's right. Got that wine going. That's the truth.
And so I tell them, like, I'm going to graduate in May, but I'm not going to practice law. And it just kind of went dead silent. She looked at me with a, what did you just say to me? Look, and then my dad, to break the silence, because he's the one who does that in our family, just goes, oh, so you're just going to go start that distillery? And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. So I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so my last semester of 3L year, I was a very terrible law student. I made just good enough grades to graduate, to pass all those classes. But other than that, it was starting to read up on how to make whiskey at all. Like, just started doing all that. And, as we got closer to that graduation date, Mom over here started getting really interested in what I was doing. And next thing I know, she's like, hey, spring break's coming up next week. Let's go to Kentucky. It's not too far of a drive. And so she and I drove out to Kentucky and went on this really fated travel around Kentucky. And we got our name, we walked indoors, which we probably shouldn't have been walking in at that point in time. But it was really kind of an eye-opening experience. I mean, like, yeah, no, I think this is something we can do, and I think this is something really exciting and new that's happening out in the U.S. So
he forgot the other part of this piece. He does have a partner and a brother who, at the same dinner, looked at him and he said, "If you're doing that, I'm doing it with you." And his wife said, "I don't care what you guys do as long as we get to move back to Texas." So that kind of brought us back this way. But his brother, as the mother, and you're paying for kids to go to college, right? That's an important item. Jonathon already had an industrial engineering degree in pre-med from Tech.
He had a job.
And he had a master's in biomedical engineering from St. Louis University. And he was working on a mechanical master's at WashU when he took an internship over at Fort Worth at Medtronics. And so now we've got a kid.
And a 6-month-old daughter.
And a 6-month-old daughter that's going to have a job and in an area where he was really excited to work, all of a sudden said, I'm not going to do that if you're going to do all this and have fun. So not
It's like,
only
I'm not
did
going to work hard and have a real job if you're just going to go make whiskey.
Yeah. Let me tell you, law school, you think law school is expensive? You ought to try a distillery.
Oh, I can't even imagine. So let me ask you this. Did your interest in whiskey come from the fact that your two sons were going to basically pour their life into it? And so you figured out, hey, I better be there to bail them out?
Actually, the first time when we were in Louisville, we did get to go see Vendôme, which was we always call it fate because we got our name on the list to create for them to
get a still,
build a still for us. When we thought we were signing the welcome list, so that was a good thing because when we needed a still, we'd already moved up on the list for 2 years, so that was good. But while we were there, I said, if we're gonna do this, I need to taste this. And I had my
told
first
you she didn't
flight.
drink whiskey.
Yeah.
And I tasted a couple, and I thought, oh man, I don't know if we can do this. This is going to be a hard one. And finally, I came to one, and I said, you know what? If whiskey tastes like this, I think we can do this. And that was the beginning of
her love affair with bourbon.
Yeah.
So.
I do like that.
It's amazing. The first one may not taste good, but the sixth, seventh, eighth one, they taste better in progression.
know.
It's weird how that
Right.
works. It is weird how that works.
I think they say your palate acclimates, right?
There you go. Yeah, palate acclimates. I like that. I'm going to use that. Fantastic. All right. So, what was the decision-making process for you, Robert? Of I absolutely don't want to do law.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there's this seed that had been planted by your dad on the distillery.
Mm-hmm.
But then your dad, I assume jokingly, says, you guys are going to go start that distillery. You pop off, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to go do. At what point did you think like, hey, this actually is what I'm going to go do?
I think within that first 2 weeks of Christmas, they started talking a lot.
It started just consuming everything we could get our hands on, which was crazy at the time.
Book-wise, knowledge-wise.
Right. Yeah, a little bit of both. No, you look at the landscape back in 2010, 2011, there wasn't a lot of books on the topic. You look at, there was the only American book was from the 60s on how to operate a continuous column still. Then you had some bookwork from a Scottish college that runs one of the few Scotch distilling programs in the world. And that was pretty much it. I mean, you had a few books on moonshining and stuff like that were out there.
Out of Tennessee, out of Kentucky.
Yeah, oh yeah. Which, again, some of those things, it's funny to read them today. You're like, yeah, that was definitely a interesting take on how that works. But
yeah, the internet didn't even have anything. So I remember looking and thinking, okay, what is a mash bill? And you
couldn't Google that.
You couldn't find anything. And
there was no YouTube back then.
No, and then I started looking if we were going to do it. We started talking about mash. I actually started finding things that beer people had a lot more out there. And gave a lot more information on equipment and all the things that you needed. But it was a little bit of, I'm going to say it was a great leap of faith.
Yeah, I would say that one of the benefits of being young and dumb and not having a family and being like, I could eat ramen noodles every day, it's not a big deal, gives you a little bit more bravado than you probably should have had at that point in time.
Yeah. Failure doesn't really mean a whole heck of a lot because you're not going to move down that much.
There's nothing to lose at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, I think that kind of, I would say, silliness, dumbness in my own head was, if I hadn't had that, I don't know if we ever would have actually done it. I think you have to do something really as crazy as starting a distillery and getting into the industry. You have to have a couple screws loose a little bit.
And be really naive.
Yeah,
too, right?
100%.
Yes.
Like you had zero, real world experience professionally anyway. And so you spend all this money on a law degree. I assume you didn't even take the bar exam.
Yes.
No, I did not take
the ethics exam.
I passed the ethics exam. I was like, cool, I'm a good person. Let's move on. We don't need to. Although part of the agreement with Marcia early on was that when we got here, I would take the Texas bar because I was actually up in Missouri in St. Louis. And I was like, oh yeah, I get them, but they have oil and gas on the bar exam in Texas. So I'll have to have time to go look at that. And then we got down here, and as we got into doing the work of starting a business, it was like, do you have time to go and study for the bar exam? I was like, no, there's no way.
Yeah. Especially not even having gone to school in Texas. There's all kinds of things that you would have to learn too. All right. So when you first decided to do this, I assume project number one was, hey, we probably need to figure out how to make whiskey.
Right.
So how did you go about doing that? Obviously, there's not a whole lot of information book-wise out there. So did you find a mentor, a guide?
So we found a couple different mentors where they started seeing a couple classes by some of the small, like really early distilleries started offering just kind of like, hey, weekend, come see how things are done. So we did a couple of those. We read every book we could get our hands on. And then through some of the connections of going to a conference and stuff, we started meeting people and found some really great mentors. For us, Nancy Fraley, she's a really well-known whiskey blender now, which back in the day, she was just early in her career. She was a really great mentor to us. Hubert Germain Raban, who was one of the very first craft distilleries in the U.S. He was a master cognac distiller that actually gave up his family's land and property because he wanted to distill grapes other than what he was allowed to in France. So he moved out to California to do that, which again is another crazy thing to do.
Seems like a theme in the industry.
Pretty much. And then we had some of the folks down at Balcones, one of the very first Texas distilleries, also early on gave us some advice on, where do we go look for yeast? Where do we purchase yeast from? Where do we, some of these cleaners, some of these other like chilling systems, boilers, that type of stuff had some really good help on that kind of functional end of starting a distillery.
And there was a American ADI,
American Distilling Institute. Yeah.
And they had conferences, and every year they were really focused towards people beginning in the distilling industry. And so you had the opportunity, they always would have good vendors there. And so we had the opportunity to meet a lot of people early on. And the most wonderful thing about this industry is that the people in it are so willing to help everybody else. I mean, we know the distillers that have been, especially the ones that have been around 5 years or more. And as we started, some of the, you could call them up and say, I need information on this, or where do you get that? And nobody ever said, you're on your own. You got to figure it out. They would say, I do this, you might try this, or you might call so-and-so. So it was really, it's a young industry in Texas, and I think Rob will probably talk a little bit more about that. But it was also, everybody was looking to survive, and they all understood that if Texas was going to have a strong distilling industry, you can't do it with one. You have to have multiples, and so
or two or three. You need a bunch.
we needed a bunch, and so if everybody supported everybody, we all had a better chance. And it was a great. And they're still great friends today. I could still call them up, and they would help you out if you needed it. I mean.
That's so awesome because, lawyers are terrible about this. A lot of lawyers, I think it's getting better, quite frankly, but kind of having that abundance mindset, right? Mm-hmm. Of look, hey, there's plenty of business to go around. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of people that are going to want to drink whiskey. So let's help everybody make as good a whiskey as possible, because then that just lifts up Texas's reputation for whiskey.
Exactly.
And so let me ask you this. When you make whiskey, I assume it takes a minute, right? This isn't something that you just concoct and then you can drink right away to see if it tastes good. How did you get from not even having any idea how to make it to starting to make your first whiskeys? How long did you have to wait to determine if they're any good?
Oh, Lord.
We thought they were good after 6 weeks, but and then we thought they were good at 2 months, and then and now we say, we really like it when they've been there about 3 years, but
right, or a decade now with some of it. Yeah, I think for us, it was one, going to the people that we really respected, we really liked what they were doing, and having those conversations, having those mentors early on was really important to have a little confidence in some of the directions that we were taking. Because to be frank, a lot of early Texas whiskey, a lot of craft distilling, there's a lot of different things being done out there that are non-traditional. And for us, one of the things that was really beat into us early on by Hubert was this notion of what they call terroir, which it means flavor of the land. So it's making, really when you translate it, it's like making something that tastes like it comes from Texas. and is distinctively different than what's being done in Kentucky or Tennessee. And so I think a lot of us early on, especially us, because that was the driving force in the brain that we got told, is how do you make something that is distinctively different than what they're doing in Kentucky, embraces what we have here, what's unique about Texas, and then also tastes good. That's the
you gotta have that too.
You gotta have that part of it. And so I think it was a lot of looking at some of that kind of advice from some of our mentors that helped us kind of put us on the right path. And then being willing to experiment and play around with things and really kind of hone in that. Because there are things that we've made that I think are absolutely brilliant and wonderful. And there's ones that I was less happy with. But those can teach you just as much as the really good things. And so for us, I think it was that early on, that kind of willingness to experiment and play with and taking some different approaches that really helped us kind of get that. Because the reality is we had no idea right off the still. I mean, our moonshine did win an award the very first year, but even that being said, a moonshine and clear spirit doesn't necessarily reflect what something's going to be when it grows up. Sometimes you have to be a little bit more of an ugly duckling to get a swan at the end of the day. So how you even operate for aging versus tasting right off the still is very different. And so having that understanding and being brave enough to do some of those things to create some of those ugly ducklings early on was really important for us, I think.
I think that one of the neat things about being in Texas, if you're coming from a place like Kentucky that is so has such a tradition. There is very much a style, but Texas, being the size of Texas, gives you none of us are going to taste the same because of terroir, right?
Right.
But I think that everybody's background was different. It wasn't like I wasn't going to my cousin to say, how do I make bourbon, or down the road to a local distillery. Everybody had to kind of look at what they liked and how they created it. And I think Rob has a great story. He talks about Texas and why what makes distilling here so exciting.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a second.
No, let's hear it.
You want to do it? Okay.
Your mom set you up.
So when you look at Texas, so the Texas whiskey industry, the real Texas whiskey industry, which I will be a little bit of a snooty person with this, the whiskey actually distilled and aged and bottled here. There was a few other things earlier than that were just brought in from Kentucky and bottled here, which is not the same thing. And I will tell you that it's more Kentucky bourbon than it is Texas, but it's a whole nother topic we can get into. But early on, the very first Texas distillers post-Prohibition, it was Garrison Brothers and Balcones. Those were the very first two. They both released whiskey back in 2008, which is kind of fun because they have very, very different products that they released. But it really kind of set a tone for kind of a really unique experience in Texas with these really different flavors and very different approaches to distilling than what you saw being done in Kentucky. So as far as backgrounds, when you look at Dan Garrison, when he was starting, he actually had a master distiller from Makersmart come down and help him. Okay. And while his distilling style is not going to be what you see done in Kentucky, a lot of their maturation and aging is really based kind of on the Kentucky model. So they have this kind of really interesting combination of Kentucky and non-Kentucky. The boys from Balcones, they actually went over to Scotland to a distillery called Burklotti and did a little class there. And so everything they do there is really based more on the Scottish model and the Scottish influence. You've got other distillers in the state that one was a master brewer at Real Ale Brewing, Ty Phelps down at Andalusia. So everything they do is really based from kind of a brewer's mindset. As for us, we're kind of the weirdos up in the north, to be quite honest with you.
Right.
Because again, we didn't come from that distilling background. We didn't have a whiskey maker really teaching us how to do things. The person who taught us really how to distill and how to handle our maturation was a master cognac distiller, Hubert Germain Rabon and Nancy Fraley, who all come from a French tradition of brandy making. And so our approach to whiskey production is all based on traditional French distilling grapes in both cognac and Armagnac. So it's very kind of weird amalgam of tradition and technique, and then taking those techniques and adapting them to a completely different environment. And so you saw that with Balcones with their Scottish style. You see that with us with the French style. You see Still Austin's got is very traditional as far as distilling style, as far as reflection of kind of the Kentucky model. And so it's kind of cool. You see really different flavor profiles that really develop from these backgrounds where people were taught from and kind of the approaches that they took. So it is really the wild, wild west in Texas when it comes to whiskey making.
And it should be nothing else, right?
Exactly. You've got every style of whiskey being made. You have bourbon and single malt and rye whiskey and wheat whiskey and corn whiskey and rice whiskey and some guys making some 12-grain whiskey. I mean, there's some crazy stuff being done in the state. But that's one of the reasons why Texas is such an exciting region for whiskey production. But yeah.
All right, Marcia, I got to ask, how did you get the name the mother of Texas whiskey?
Rob says because I mother everybody to death, but
You're the only son who's ever said that about their mother, I'm sure, Rob.
We were actually in Houston at a really popular whiskey bar named Reserve 101, and the owner at that time was Mike Raymond, and we were sitting there and we were all talking about it, and he is the one that first coined it. He said, well, you should just be you are the mother of Texas whiskey. And it kind of stuck. And then a lot of the other distillers would pick it up. And I used to laugh. It's because nobody can remember my name. It's easier for them to call me Mom. And I'm so much older than everybody. So it was, it just kind of grew. And then the people down at Crowded Barrel, and part of the whiskey trial, Daniel down there, as a joke one day, they went to a tattoo artist and they had them make one of those temporary tattoos, and then they started sending out the temporary tattoos with Marcia, the mother of Texas
with her
whiskey,
face on it,
great.
with it, and so it just has grown from there, right?
Yeah, it's a moniker just kind of stuck, but it is funny because you'll see some of the other Texas distillers walk around and just be like, "Mom, what's going on? What are you doing?" Like, everyone just calls her Mom, which is kind of fun. Yeah.
That is great. And so all this gets started, right? How involved are you from the very beginning in terms of you learning the whiskey too and how to distill and all of those things? Or are you more marketing or operations or finance? What's your role?
When there's three of you, you're everything.
You're everything. Yep.
And the guys started. We found our home in Denison, and we always say fate brought us there. And Rob will tell you more about that on our history. But I think that they came down. And they were here a couple of months, and they said, wait a minute, we need more help. And my husband was in the mining business.
Mm-hmm.
And he traveled a lot. And so I would come down, and pretty soon I would be here, a couple of weeks. And then pretty soon it was 3 weeks. And then before we knew it, I was down here more because whenever he came back to town, all he wanted to do was come down to the distillery. So I would say after that first year, I have been down here 100% of the time, and we do everything. If you work at a distillery and there's three of you, you help with mashing, you help with blending, you help with bottling, you help with barreling, you do cleanup, you do repairs, you do everything it takes. And then I kind of moved into, the logistics. Let's see, we got to make sure we got toilet paper and stuff. You start with the basics.
The most basic of logistics.
And then, we just kind of, it worked in that I do a lot of those types of things, the bookkeeping. We had a rule at the distillery that it wouldn't run if only one person was there. That's too big of equipment, and it's too many things can go on.
Right.
So the hours are really long. So Robert would come in the morning early, and then Jonathon would stay late at night, and I would stay with both of them. And
she worked more hours than both of us. Was really what happened. But yeah, because we would start, generally, we start 4 a.m. and they'll shut down 7, 8 p.m. at night.
It's a long day.
Yeah.
Unless it's during the summer, in which case, because, when it's 109 degrees outside, the chillers don't work quite as well as they do otherwise. and we'd have to switch over and we'd start at 4 p.m. and run until noon the next day. I mean, it was
wow.
And Jonathan's family learned to live at the distillery. His kids behind the fermenters. I mean, it used to be little tykes, and now it's switches and places where you do your homework. And when you're a family, it's who's picking up the kids after school, because their mom is also a teacher and she's working, and on Saturday everybody's working, and so the kids are they're sitting there, and they grow up there, and
it's been quite a wild ride, because I mean, it was, you talk about the first
barrel was laid down on Danica's third birthday. Granger wasn't even born, and she's 12.
Yeah, our first 6 years, you're talking 70 to 85 hours a week is what we'd be working.
Was there any point in time during that where any of you or all of you were just like, this is terrible, we're never going to make this happen, let's just quit and actually go get jobs?
I don't think we ever got to that point. I think
well, you may not say that.
Sometimes you'd butt heads, with the long hours and be tired, and you think, I don't want to deal with this. But but it never was anything more than a few hours. Rob would have quit, I guess, but the rest of us wouldn't have.
No, not quit. I mean, there was a time when you look at 2018.
That was tough.
That was a year that was like, hey, the business either has to become profitable or like moving.
Yeah, we did our best.
Yeah. That you just have to move on and say, it just didn't work out. And it was the year we said, all right, this year we have to hit this growth, this amount of sales. Otherwise, we have to shut down. Won't make it.
But you're already working 80-hour weeks. So what do you do to ramp it up?
That was the question.
You have to get sales, and so then so then Robert and I would go out on Friday and Saturdays, and we would and they sent us to Fort Worth. Nothing was ever close. Weatherford, and we would go out and we would do tastings in Total Wines and all the little local liquor stores, and we started seeing some growth in some. Sales were improving with it. And then by chance, Total Wine picked us up in 2018.
Oh, wow.
And
so that was the big page turner.
That was our first large.
Yeah, I mean, like we couldn't really get into specs. We couldn't get into, there was just a lot of barriers in the way for us at that point in time. And then the moment that Total Wine came in and said, okay, we'll take a chance on you guys, then that's when everything kind of went crazy. We were able to sales, doubled that year. So finally we're like, oh, the hard work is paying off. That's nice to see.
Yeah.
And it kind of led to two really great years for us. And then you get into 2020.
What was it with 2020?
I don't know what happened there.
I'll tell you something that I used to tell my sons. I think that the thing that kept them going was every time anything got really difficult, something really positive would happen. Like our whiskey, our first, our corn whiskey, we put into a competition, and it won the best corn whiskey in the world from World Whiskey Awards. It won Gavel Golds in San Francisco 1 year, and so all of a sudden you think maybe what we're doing is correct. And then
sales
1 year,
wise, no one cares about corn whiskey.
Yes,
so that was the problem with that.
But you still get somebody saying that we believe in what you're doing a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we got this email through the info account, and that was 2017 from a company called Berry Brothers and Rudd. And Jonathon always answered the info accounts. He says, usually it's like some Saudi prince, this isn't going to work. But he says, this one sounds legit. So he sends it over to Robert, and Robert looks up and he says, wait a minute, this is really legit. Berry Brothers and Rudd are the oldest wine and spirit merchants in the UK. And they did all of the spirits for the Prince of Wales and the Queen of England at that time. And so they asked us for samples.
Yeah, so it was kind of a crazy story. So they started business in 1699, They've been in the same
Wow.
building since then. So I'll tell you how
It's an
long-
old building.
Yeah.
It's at 4 St. James Place.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
number 3 St. James Place. Yeah. Yeah, the back wall was the tennis court for King Henry VII. Like, it's been there for a bit.
Wow.
The cellars.
Yeah, in the cellars, Napoleon III planned his takeover of France from the cellars. He was exiled.
So just a little bit of history.
Yeah, it's a little history of this place. In 1842, they rented out the upstairs of their building to this little fledgling country called Texas. And for 3 years, it operated as the extension of the embassy called the legation, because it was right next to all the palaces where the Queen and the Prince of Wales were. So for 3 years, they rented it out to Texas. And so to this day, there's a plaque on the side of their building that the governor in the 60s gave them that said this is the Texas legation. And they wanted to honor that. And they've been looking for Texas whiskey for about 5 years. Every year they would send out things to get samples. And they're like, no, none of this really stands out to us. So we had released some corn whiskey. We hadn't released any bourbon yet at this point. And I was like, yeah, let's send some samples. Let's see what happens. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
It's 15 months old.
The bourbon was, it was like 15 months old at the time,
That's
which is
young.
incredibly young for whiskey. But we're like, yeah, sure. We're young and dumb. We don't know any better than that. We sent it over to them. And 2 months later, it was right around Christmas, we got a call back, and it was like this very thick Scottish accent. This guy's super excited. He was like, do you still have the barrels? And we're like, what? Who? Huh?
I need subtitles, man.
Like, what's going on? And he was like, hey, I'm Doug MacGyver, master blender for Berry Brothers and Rudd. Just tasted your stuff. I absolutely love it. Do you have these 6 barrels? I want you to put a blend together of these and taste it and tell me what you think. And we went back to the warehouse and pulled samples, made a little blend, tasted it. And we're like, yeah, that tastes really good. And he was like, we want it. And next thing you know, that was really one of the first really crazy things is our whiskey got sent over to the UK before we had released any bourbon in the US that they released there called Texas Legation in London. And so we got to go over to London for the release of it. It was a really cool
We got to go to Edinburgh
experience,
for the release. And so you have these things that are that energize you, that give you
as the bank accounts.
Yes. Well, the money's not energizing me, so what else can we find?
Exactly.
Well, but then the next year they purchased 30 barrels. And so it was growing as we got into 2020. And then tariffs hit and most of the importing stopped and something else wonderful happened.
Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful. Right before the world went to craziness, in February of 2020, our kind of flagship bourbon Harbinger was named best bourbon in the world by Whiskey Magazine, which I will tell you took us by surprise a little bit. It was the first time a pot still bourbon had ever won, the first time a bourbon outside of Kentucky had ever won. It was a lot of firsts, and it was absolutely crazy, and it almost immediately turned our world upside down. You had like GQ putting out articles in India about our whiskey. I'm like, who tastes what? All sorts of stuff. Forbes did an article that came out about 2 weeks after the shutdown began, which everybody was at home and had nothing better to do than to read articles from Forbes, apparently, because that went viral. And then next thing we know, like I get a phone call from Total Wine because they had just received their basically like quarterly allotment that we send them, and they were like, "Hey, it's all gone." And I was like, "Did a fire happen? Like, what happened?" And they're like, "No, it within 3 days everything sold out. Can we have more?" And it's like,
only if you agree to raise the prices.
yeah. And it was like, well, no, I would have needed to known 4 years ago if we were going to do that. Just because, as you were mentioning, making whiskey takes time. It's years in the making to actually get those things done. And so we were like, oh geez, what's about to happen? And so over the last kind of couple of years, we've been just trying to send stuff and kind of placate stores and stuff kind of around the country, because we had agreed with Total Wine to start sending stuff kind of nationwide with them. That was one of the big boosts to us that happened in 2019 after the great part of 2018. And then we had this national distribution. Now we couldn't fill we just were like, well, we got to wait 4 more months before there's more ready. And so it's been kind of that adventure since then, which is where St. Sally came after that. There's a couple other things that have happened to us from there, but it's been a wild ride over the last 3 years. And, people are like, well, when is there going to be more? And like, well, we're, about 4 years after that award, we started increasing production. And then we were like, okay, well, let's not increase too crazy, because is that demand going to last? Is it what's going to happen business-wise?
Do you fall off the map again?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's held super steady and growing. And so we finally this year we're about to make our first like major expansion for the distillery. About 60 days, hopefully. I'm going to go crazy if it doesn't happen, but we're going to be breaking ground on a new barrel warehouse. We've got some new stills that we've ordered that are going to be coming in next year. So we increased production, and now we're really going to increase production. So hopefully we'll be able to actually meet demand.
That is fantastic. So as you look back over, those first 6 years or so, what are you most proud of? That's to both of you.
Ooh.
I'm the mother, and guess what? I'm most proud of myself.
It's probably the same thing as my mom is most proud of. Yeah.
I am proud of the way that they've grown up, that they've accepted these challenges, that they have put so much effort into learning a business, and the liquor business is like no other business. There's a learning curve there. They have persevered when it was tough, and I think they've grown so much as individuals, and yet I with integrity. Even when they had choices that would have made things easier, they were not made. So I'm really, I'm so proud of them.
No, tear up over here. Things I'm most proud of. For me, I think what I'm most proud of would have to kind of be divided into two things. It'd be number one, that we stuck it out, that we were like, yeah, we could just walk away to, now, and it'd be probably better off if we did. And we made the choice of like, another year of 80-hour work weeks. Let's do this. And to survive and go through that, to me, something that I look back on, and like today, I'm like, I don't know if I want to work 80 hours. I don't think I could work 80 hours again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy with the 58 to 62 hour work week now. But just sticking through that, I think that to me was kind of, and having the parental support through that someone believed in us, at least that at that time. So that was, to me, something I'm really, really proud of, that we as a family kind of came together, and I think we're way tighter as a family and a unit than we ever would have been had we kind of spread out and done our own things. So to me, that's one thing I would say I'm most proud of, is how we came together as a family to fight, survive, and thrive together.
I think the other thing I am so proud of is their creativity. They didn't have to copy somebody else. And I think that we'll probably tell you a little bit more about the whiskeys and why they're different. But, we use the pot still. We use different barreling techniques. We use different, and everything they tried to do, they've been extremely creative. So it is not taking what somebody else has done and copying it. You take information, but how do you apply it, and how do you create something different? And I think that's what makes our whiskeys so unique, is the fact that they're so creative, and they have wonderful flavors. They have all the things you want, but they're not. There's no cut and paste on it.
I love it. I think when you have two absolutely amazing attributes, which is creativity, and you pair that with grit, I mean the world is yours at that point, right? If you can stick to it and you're creative, then basically all you need is time. All you need is time. Awesome. We are out of time. Ooh. Speaking of, did you like that transition there, Marcia?
There we go.
And so thank y'all so much. Crazy interesting. We have a couple of bottles here sitting in front of Rob. And so if you're looking for Ironroot at Total Wine, or I'm sure many other stores.
Across Texas, Specs, Twin, Pogo's here in Dallas has their stuff.
Awesome. Well, that's the label you're looking for right there in front of Rob. We are actually going to have a little tasty taste after we're done here. And so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you all again so much for being here. And thank all of you for tuning in to the Driven Crowd podcast. We'll see you next time.